Welcome to Church of the Beatitudes online. Are you getting tired of me saying that online part? I am. And I know we mention it during worship every once in a while, but I think sometimes we have to understand that we're together on this, that the loneliness and the frustration that you feel is felt by other people. All of us are growing tired of the social distancing and the wearing of masks. But we hope for the next 45 to 50 minutes that this gathering, this coming together, will give you an opportunity to be able to find that sense of peace again, a sense of contacting and being in the presence of the divine. The divine, I believe, is always around us. But it's moments like these that allow us to focus in particular upon that. So if this is your first time with us online, we welcome you. And for you and for those who are frequent watchers of this, we ask you to just take a deep breath and then exhale it and truly be present in this moment. And allow this next song to center you as we start this time together.
A week ago, Ellie introduced us to a new element of worship that we're calling Making Love Real. She spoke about the inspiring life of the late Senator John Lewis, whose civil rights activism grew from a love for his fellow segregated students during the 1960s. This week, I want to share with you not so much a person who's making love real, but an organization. But first, a little backstory. 20 years ago, I was first introduced to this organization by a tiny little announcement in my church bulletin. It was asking for volunteers to grocery shop for the homebound. At the time, I was 9 months pregnant. I brushed it aside very quickly for lack of energy. Flash forward 5 years. My mom-in-law, who had been helping my husband and I care for our son, found herself with spare time on her hands while our son was at preschool. Enter Duet, Partners in Health and aging. The dance begins. My mom-in-law volunteered at Duet, and it didn't take long for her to realize a love for their mission. So she applied for a full-time position, got the job, and she continues to work for them to this very day. Flash forward 12 years. Duet again dances into my world, this time as a sponsor for my master's internship in their communications department. For a year, I honed my writing skills, learning not only the value of a good press release, but what making love real actually looks like, as I witnessed countless lives changed through the love of Duet. For those of you who may not know, Duet is a Valley nonprofit interfaith organization that's been serving older adults in Greater Phoenix since 1981. From free of charge support services for family caregivers and grandparents raising their grandkids to an army of volunteers for the homebound, I saw firsthand the legacy of love that Reverend Dr. Dosha Carlson must have had in mind when she started Duet. It's a legacy of love. Love for the homebound, love for the forgotten and isolated, love for our beloved seniors and wisdom keepers. My challenge as an intern with Duet was crafting the right words to express the legacy that I came to know. Some beautiful stories when I interviewed neighbors with their volunteers who not only helped them continue to live independently, but became one another's confidant and best friend. Or a grandparent who had sacrificed their retirement to raise their grandchild. Possible only with the help of Duet. I recently spoke with Beatitudes member and executive director Ann Wheat about Duet's legacy of love.
Ann, how would you say that Duet demonstrates God's love in a tangible way?
I think Duet demonstrates God's love in numerous tangible ways every single day. And it goes back from our whole history, 39 years of providing service in our community, which really started with the dear Reverend Dr. Dosha Carlson, setting a real foundation of faith and action, of service through love. And I can tell you now as executive director, that still guides us each and every day. We have 4 core service areas where we reach out to some of the most vulnerable people in our community. Volunteer services, where we serve homebound neighbors, as we call them, homebound elders, or adults with disabilities who no longer can drive, by bringing them their groceries, friendly visits, providing rides to doctor's appointments, helping out with paying bills or reading letters to them if they have visual impairments. We provide a big program for grandparents raising grandchildren, serving about 400 or more grandparents and nearly 1,000 grandchildren who we help keep out of foster care by giving them, supporting the grandparents to keep them as a family. We serve hundreds of family caregivers through support groups, through workshops, through personalized guidance. And then, of course, we are the only provider of training for nurses to become faith community nurses, and then help them, support them to set up health and wellness programs for their congregations and often members of the surrounding community. And we do that with just a very small staff, and thanks to a mighty force of volunteers.
Right.
That really provide a lot of this.
So for somebody listening out there right now, what can they do to help Duet continue to provide and make God's love real for others, do you think?
Well, I'm going to start by just saying that a week doesn't go by that I am not seeing members of Church of the Beatitudes, people I've known for so long, serving in all sorts of ways. Through volunteer service as a member of the board of directors, serving on committees, driving people to medical appointments or delivering groceries, helping out in the office. We couldn't do what Duet does without them. And also, I think, and I would just invite anyone to call us, sometimes I have to pinch myself to realize that from the day Dosha founded this organization, Duet has provided every support, every service free of charge. It's not a model that logically you would think would ever work. And here we are almost 40 years later, still doing that. And I know that is because we have been connected to giving, caring people who help us make this possible. They live out their faith by helping us. In addition to volunteering, we're in a pandemic now. I don't really think that Duet has ever faced such a challenging time. And so I would hope if people were interested in helping to support us financially, that they would give me a call where they can contribute to us through a charitable tax contribution. They can be part of our Vision Society, or just give a one-time donation, or possibly even think about estate planning. I'd love to chat with them about that. Duet can't exist without people who help in financially as well. And then the other way is certainly if we can be of service to anyone in the congregation or someone they know. We need people in the community to be connectors. And I think those are kind of the main ways that we can use help, particularly during this pandemic. We were founded, I think, through Dosha's sense of faith, hope, and love. And I think we are a wonderful place for folks to be able to live out their faith and feel really, really good about it. And I'd love to have a conversation with anyone about that. I consider Church of the Beatitudes my home, and I'm proud that we still have that connection, such a close connection as an organization.
Well, we are grateful for Duet loving on us and all the members. And thank you so much, Anne.
Thank you.
To make love real in this topsy-turvy world that we currently find ourselves, I believe you have to walk the walk, talk the talk, socially distanced, of course, and yes, dance the duet.
We know that all things work together for those who are called, those who love God, those who are called to your purpose. together. All things work together. All things work together. Work together for good. So we lift up our hearts, lift up our hands, lift up our hope in you. Though we may not yet understand, we know it's true. So we lift up our hearts, lift up our hands, lift up our hope in you. Though we may not yet understand, we know it's true. All things work together. 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 Work together for good.
Our scripture reading for today is Genesis chapter 18, verses 16 through 33, the judgment pronounced on Sodom. Then the men set out from there, and they looked toward Sodom. And Abram went with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abram what I am about to do, seeing that Abram shall become a great and mighty nation, and all of the nations on earth shall be blessed in him? No, I have chosen for him that he may charge his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring about for Abram what he has promised him." Then the Lord said, "How great is the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, and how very much of grave of their sin. I must go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know." So the men turned from there and went toward Sodom. While Abram remained standing before the Lord, Abram came near and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you sweep away the place and not forgive it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" And the Lord said, "If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will forgive the whole place for their sake." And Abram answered, "Well, let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord. I am but who is dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5? And he said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." And again he spoke to him, "Suppose 40 are found there." And he answered, "For the sake of 40, I will not do it." Then he said, "Oh, do not let the Lord be angry if I speak. Suppose 30 are found there." And he answered, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." And he said, "Let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord again. Suppose 20 are found there." And he answered, "For the sake of the 20, I will not destroy it." And then he said, "Oh, do not let the Lord be angry if I speak just once more. Suppose 10 are found there. For the sake of the 10." The Lord said, "I will not destroy it." And then the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abram, and Abram returned to his place. Thanks be to God.
But you promised. Do you recall as a parent how many times you actually heard that from your children? You would tell them something, and in your mind, it's kind of this tentativeness to it, but in their little mind, it's like, well, that's a promise, and I'm going to hold you to it. But you promised. We know what it's like to be on the receiving end of that. When an individual tells us something, and we trust them and say, okay, I'm going to rely on that, and then they don't follow through. It's easy for us to either say or think in our mind, but you promised. And then I would imagine that there's opportunities that we have said things to people, and we've given our word, and we weren't able to follow through. And again, we can either hear them say it, or in our own minds, we feel the guilt and we say, yeah, but you promised them. Promises unfulfilled. What happens, however, when the person that is making the promise is God? Then what do you do? I think an answer to that question is found in the story of Abraham. And in this story, we're going to be focusing on fertility and unfulfilled promises. But to understand how we get to that point, we've got to go back to the very beginning. You can actually take the book of Genesis and divide it into two sections. Section number 1 would be Genesis 1 through 11. Section 2 would be Genesis 12 and onward. So in the first section, when it comes to fertility, God creates Adam and Eve and then says to them, be fruitful and multiply. God is endowing them just like he created through creation, through his words. In the same way, God is empowering them with those words, be fruitful and multiply. It's as if God says, look, I'm the creator, and now I'm giving you power to procreate. I don't want to worry about it. I don't want to think about it. That's on you. The same thing happens in Genesis chapter 6. After the story of the flood takes place, we hear God tell Noah, be fruitful and multiply. Again, that command to endow human beings with that ability to procreate. And God again gives that gift and then just kind of steps back and says, look, that's yours. Then we move into the second section of Genesis, Genesis chapter 12. And this is when things become really interesting. Because in Genesis chapter 12, we are introduced as readers to a particular individual by the name of Abraham. Abraham, as a character in the story, doesn't know anything about Genesis 1 to 11. He knows nothing about this command by God to be fruitful and multiply. That's all information that he does not have access to, but we as readers do have access to. We have an advantage over Abraham. So when God says to Abraham in verses 1 to 3, I will make of you a great nation, all of a sudden our curiosity should be piqued. This is the same God who basically said, look, be fruitful and multiply. This is yours. This is in your ball. This is what you need to do. Now all of a sudden, the I comes in. I will make you a great nation. He does not say to Abraham, go to the land that I will show you, and there be fruitful and multiply. In verses 1 to 3, God takes back that power. The power that he had given to Adam and Eve, he now assumes for himself again. I will make you a great nation. And this is a promise that Abraham, according to the story, stakes a lot on, that he's willing to pursue, that he's willing to follow, and leave the land of Mesopotamia and travel to Canaan. I will make you a great nation. 4 times in the story of Abraham, we're going to hear that promise once again. A total of 5 times God is going to promise Abraham that he will make him a great nation. So instead of Abraham having that power, God takes the power. The second time it appears is in Genesis 13. The third time it appears is in Genesis 15. And this one is very interesting because all of a sudden we see something that is added to that command. In Genesis chapter 15, verse 6, it says, "Then Abraham believed in the Lord." He believed that God would make him a great nation, and God reckoned it to him as righteousness. God says, I see you and your trust in me, and because of that, you are righteous. And so by the end of this third promise, everything seems to be going well. But then we move into the fourth promise, and that's found in Genesis 17. Now, what's interesting to keep in mind is from the time that God called Abraham and gave him that first promise to this time, which is the fourth promise, it's been almost 15 to 20 years. For 15 to 20 years, Abraham and his wife have waited for God to fulfill God's promise. And then in chapter 17, verse 1, we hear these words. Now, when Abraham was 99 years old. Now, again, the number is probably exaggerated. However, it's still the point of the story is Abraham by now is an old man. And again, as readers, we're realizing that if God is going to fulfill God's promise, God's running out of time because Abraham keeps getting older and older. And then it says in verse 1 that the Lord appeared to Abraham and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. Do you hear what's happening? At the very beginning, the first time God says, hey, look, leave your country, go to this land I'm going to give you, and I will make you a great nation. That's it. No conditions. Now, in chapter 17, verse 1, by the time we come to the fourth promise, God is now putting out stipulations. I need you, Abraham, to walk before me and be blameless. And as readers, we're beginning to wonder, wait a minute. Instead of just being a promise, is God starting to shift and make it a conditional promise? In verse 6 of that same chapter, God says, I will make you exceedingly fruitful and I will make nations of you. And as a response, what takes place is God says to Abraham, as a way of marking my promise and making a covenant with you, Abraham, I need you to take yourself and all the men within your clan and circumcise them. Listen to what it says in verses 10 and 11. This is my covenant, which you shall keep, and it's between me and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. And these two verses, many individuals have taken them to mean that this is an external sign of God's covenant with Abraham and his family. Now, that's not a really good external sign because back in those days, just like today, we walk around clothed, and that would be something that you would not be able to see. So is it possible that there's a deeper meaning here? And what the writer is telling us is basically God is giving Abraham a symbolic act that he needs to do, and by doing that act, he is symbolically conceding that the power to procreate is not his. God even has control over his organ of reproduction and marks it so that Abraham and all of his descendants will remember that ultimately, when it comes to fertility, it's ultimately on God. But that becomes a problem because God has promised now for the fourth time that he will make Abraham a great nation. But in order to become a great nation, Abraham needs to first have a son, and that hasn't taken place for almost 20 years. So God can talk all he wants, and Abraham does reply and took a lot more courage and faith than I might have had to follow through in God's command. But this chapter and this part of the story doesn't stop there. It gets even better. In verse 15, God tells Abraham that Sarah will become pregnant, that she will have a child. In verse 17, it says, then Abraham fell on his face. Now, what's interesting about that is back at the very beginning of chapter 17, verse 3, when God first encounters Abraham, Abraham falls on his face. A sense of awe, a sense of respect, a sense of reverence. But in verse 17, we read something different. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed. God has just said, I will give you, for the fourth time, I will give you a son. And Abraham looks at him and he falls down on the ground and he laughs. He laughs at God. He says, what in the world are you talking about? We have waited and waited and waited and nothing has happened. And as readers, we should begin to question, because why is it that God has to continue to repeat this promise? Does God not have the ability to fulfill the promise? Or does God not have the will to fulfill this promise? The next chapter, chapter 18 of Genesis, we find the last promise that God gives to Abraham. He repeats it a fifth time. He tells Sarah, you will have a son. And this time in chapter 18, it's Sarah who laughs. Abraham and Sarah have basically, by this point, gotten tired of God. It's almost as if, enough, God. You expect us to continue to believe you? Remember that saying, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice. Fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Well, what happens when you've been fooled 5 times? You laugh. You realize you made a mistake. The story in chapter 18 is the chapter that precedes Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham entertains God, who appears as 3 people. And after that meal, as they are starting to make their way outside of Abraham's camp and towards Sodom, the writer has us listen in to God, either thinking to himself or just quietly mumbling the following words. Then the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him, so that he will direct his children and his household after him, to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Now, if you listen carefully to that, you heard some new stuff. First of all, God says that I will promise to give him a child, not because he is righteous. Earlier, remember in chapter 15, God said, you believe in me, you're righteous. Now God says, doesn't even mention that. He says, I have chosen him. And then he adds a conditional that makes this promise now a condition upon Abraham and how Abraham replies to God. That's why it's so important to hear these words, that he is asking Abraham to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. And if you do what is right and just, if you do righteousness, it's almost as if God forgot earlier that he had said Abraham was righteous. But he says, if you do what is right and just, then I will bring about what I promised you. You see the shift taking place here? It's almost as if God said at the very beginning, look, human beings should be able to procreate. That's all them. I'm not going to worry about it. Abraham comes along and God says, oh, man, I don't know if that was a great decision I made. You know, I think I'm going to take that back, and I will have power over a human being's fertility. But I will promise Abraham that he'll have a child. But by the fifth time he makes this promise, God has turned a promise into a condition upon Abraham. And Abraham is tired. Abraham has grown weary of God. And in the next few verses, it says that Abraham stood before God. Now, that saying is one that we can quickly go over, but it's really powerful. I mean, here's God who said, I came down to check out and see if Sodom deserves to be destroyed. Here's this destroying God, and Abraham boldly walks and stands before him and begins this bargaining. And in the bargaining, he makes little jabs at God. He says to him, oh, by the way, aren't you the judge of all the earth? Aren't you supposed to treat people fairly? Aren't you supposed to be a God of God's word? That really hasn't gone well for me, God. And then Abraham says, look, if there's 50 righteous people, do you hear the play? Now God has said, the only way I will give you a child is if you're righteous. And Abraham goes, I could be righteous all day long and you still won't give me a child. And he brings that into God's face by saying, you know what, God? If there were 50 righteous people, would you destroy it? And God says, no. And Abraham says to the readers, in a way, through his language, do you believe God? You think if there were 50 righteous people, God wouldn't? I wouldn't be so sure. What about 40, God? 40 righteous people? You probably end up destroying him even if you said you wouldn't. 30, 20, 10. And he stops at 10. It's almost as if the reader is supposed to keep going to, like, if there's one righteous person, God will say, no, I won't destroy him. And God will. We are led to believe, as readers, we are to sense the frustration that Abraham has toward this God that will not fulfill the promises that he's given. God is not one that you can trust. Jack Miles, in his book, God, a Biography, which a lot of this sermon came out of, this is my foundation that I created this on. He says the following: the point of the dialogue is to show the depth of Abraham's resentment to the broken promise of fertility and the contempt for what seems to be an 11th hour attempt on God's part to abrogate or revoke the promise. Abraham is saying to the Lord, you say you will, but really? Will you? And when you don't fulfill your promise, your excuse will be that it was some defect on my part, in my righteousness. So how does Abraham deal with unfulfilled promises of God? He calls God out on it. And while God tries to turn and blame Abraham, Abraham says, nuh-uh, this is on you. You made a promise. Now, if you keep reading, you'll find out that Abraham eventually has a child. But at this point, if you were to close the book, you would have to decide, do you agree or disagree with Abraham? One of the reasons why this story is so important is because Christians continue to wrestle with the same issue that Abraham did. Will God fulfill God's promises? Now again, remember how Abraham replied to this. Abraham was not afraid calling out God. His worldview, his view of God, was one that you could call out on. But hear today what a modern Christian says about God's promises. This individual proposes that there are 5,467 divine promises throughout the Bible. And about these promises, he says the following: the promises of God reveal God's particular and eternal purposes to which God is unchangeably committed and upon which believers can totally depend. This individual is saying, in disagreeing with Abraham, and saying God is dependable. God will fulfill God's promises. He is unchangeably committed to fulfilling what he has promised. And then the writer gives himself an escape clause. These promises are, however, and as soon as you hear the however, it's like, oh no. It's almost as if it goes against everything that you've said up to this point. These promises are, however, conditioned upon obedience on the part of believers. So if you take one of God's promises and you claim it, and it doesn't work out for you, don't blame God, blame yourself. Abraham says, no. You hold God accountable. So what are we supposed to do about that? Well, if you take what this writer proposes, that the problem is ours, then there's not much you can do about it. You'll carry the guilt. You'll carry the angst of not having enough trust. And you'll claim a promise, and if it doesn't happen, then you'll blame yourself again. And that will happen over and over until you feel like you can become righteous enough. And yet they tell you that the gift of God, it's a gift of God, your righteousness, but yet you have to be righteous enough for God to fulfill God's promises. And that's one particular way to look at this idea of God and God's promises. Perhaps we need to look at another worldview. One of the reasons why this story was told to begin with, of Abraham, was the ancients believed that God was literally a part of fertility. In procreation, God had to have God's hand in it. And ultimately, the power went to God. This is a story that explains why Abraham couldn't have a child for a long time. But that's one particular worldview. I wonder if that's a worldview that we're comfortable with. I know there are some Christians who believe that if as a couple they are infertile, then some Christians would say that's God's will. However, if we continue to have a worldview that God gives promises, then eventually we're either going to be rejecting God because God doesn't fulfill those promises, or we're going to beat ourselves up because we're not good enough for God to fulfill those promises for us. Maybe these whole idea of God giving us promises is in the Bible more a story about humanity and how humanity, when faced with difficulties in life, rather than looking within themselves, they look outside of themselves for the power. That's one way you could live your life. Or another one is that you realize that you are alive, that somehow that it is God who is the ultimate source of life, of energy. And maybe the greatest promise that you've been given is that you have the power and ability within you to face whatever comes your direction. I don't know the answer on this one. I rack my brain trying to come up with one. I think you're going to have to figure this one out for yourself. Or you can find someone and talk to someone about it. Bounce ideas off of each other. Maybe we are asked to be a little bit more tentative in how we look at God and how we look at our world and how we look at ourselves. Maybe that's what makes life exciting. Think about it. Amen.
Listening to Pastor Tony's sermon today, there was only one prayer that came to mind for me. And then when I read through the prayer, I thought about it, let it sit in a little bit. I found that it is both a prayer that supports what Pastor Tony was saying and also contradicts what he was saying. It's so hard to exist in a world where the unknown is surrounding us in every single direction, and especially now. And in those moments of the unknown, I'm understanding a little bit more about the rituals that people embrace or begin anew. With that, I hope that part of this prayer that I'm going to share with you right now will continue to be a part of everyone's ritual, because I think it's an opportunity for us to surrender those things that we are uncomfortable with, to surrender our fears to the unknown, and to surrender our ability to think that we can control anything at all. So please join me in prayer. God, give me grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, courage to change the things which should be changed. And oh Lord, we are in that time now. Give us the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. Give us the skill and the ability to live one day at a time, to sit and rest in enjoying those moments, one moment at a time, accepting the hardships that all of us collectively are facing as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this world as it is and not as I would have it. Please grant me the strength to slow down, to breathe deeply, to recognize how everything feels inside, and to make sure that the words that I share with others always come from a space of love. It is in your name that we pray. Amen.
thank you for having spent this time with us. Before you leave, please receive this blessing. May you be blessed with a sense of serenity to accept the way that your world is right now. And then may you be blessed with a sense of courage to know that there are things that you can change in your own life. And there are certain things that no matter how hard you try, you ain't going to change them. That's why that first blessing is so important, that you have the serenity to accept those things, and then that you have the courage to change those things that you can. And as you make these changes in your life, may you hold on to one constant, and that is the blessing of a spirit of love. A spirit of love that is a part of who you are and finds its unique expression through you. You can make love real for another person in a way that no one else can. So let that blessing, let that gift come through you to others. Amen.
The lands in longing call out your name. The tongues are different, the prayer the same. With humble spirits can we believe that God is bigger than we conceive. The day is coming, the Lord will move with the hand of justice and the heart of love. The will of heaven on this earth be done. The day is coming, oh let it come. A barren wasteland we must reclaim, with hearts forbearing each other's pain. Grant us the courage to make a place, to plant tomorrow's seeds of peace. The day is coming, the Lord will move with the hand of justice and the heart of love. The will of heaven on this earth be done. The day is coming, oh let it come. The day is coming, the Lord will move with the hand of justice and the heart of love. The will of heaven on this earth be done. The day is coming, oh let it come. The day is coming, oh let it come.
Excuse me, how did it suddenly get to be August? Summer has blown by. And suddenly, though, I have a ton of news to share. First, let's connect. Zoom with us. On Sunday at 9 a.m., At Ruminate, the topic is safe in no uncertain terms, the precautionary principle. And then you can join us at 4 o'clock. Your kids can come for our virtual summer camp, grades 1st through 6th. This is at 4 o'clock. And then at 7 is a virtual camp for our 7th graders through high school. And don't miss Wednesday, our Beatitudes boost at 6 o'clock. This is a lot of fun. Last week we had show and tell, and we talked about our toothpaste. Yeah, you don't want to miss that. If you want a link and you want to come join the fun, get some laughs, email me at media@beatitudeschurch.org. Second, faith in action needs your help. School is starting, and Maryland's school kids need supplies. Teachers want to facilitate safe learning, but budgets are even more stretched this year due to COVID. But you can help. You can donate supplies online to Kathy Kim or give donation check for them to shop for you. I've sent a link to the supply list and further instructions in my weekly e-blast, or you can find it under news and events on our website. Third, I'll bet you're wondering what kind of good trouble Pastor Tony is into these days. Starting next Thursday at 9 a.m., you can find out. You can tune into his first podcast, Between the Lines 1, 2, 3, on your favorite podcast platform. Each week, he'll be discussing 1 news article, 2 headlines, and 3 quotes related to religion and society. Fourth, I want to remind you that the church office remains closed, but you can still reach us by phone if you need anything. And you can also help us financially with your gifts and your offerings by giving online to the church at beatitudeschurch.org. Call us if you need help setting that up. Lastly, a reminder, if you're watching this before 10 a.m., you are in luck. You can join us for a live broadcast of our communion service of worship. So grab a small piece of bread or cracker and a cup of wine or juice and join us from home. We'll see you all here virtually next Sunday. Until then, be well, share our services with all of your friends, and bye for now.